House Speaker Mike Johnson at the Republican National Convention this week, and Speaker Johnson joins me now live. Welcome to This Week, Mr. Speaker. Former President Trump said he was going to use his acceptance speech to come together, to promote unity, and you echoed that, saying, treat one another with dignity and respect, and that the discourse should not be personal or targeting people. But after truly his emotional and very compelling first part of his speech, he turned to grievances, and I want you to take a listen to him last night at his rally.
I call her Laughing Kamala. You ever watch her laugh? She's crazy. She's nuts. She's not as crazy as Nancy Pelosi, crazy Nancy. And these are Biden indictments. These are a sick, weak, pathetic man who can't run an election, so he indicts his opponent thinking that's going to win. This stupid president that we have, stupid, he's a stupid person.
Has he missed an opportunity to promote unity?
No, he hasn't. Look, there's campaign rhetoric on both sides. There has been. Remember, it was less than a week and a half ago that President Biden said we ought to put Donald Trump in the crosshairs, effectively, put him in the center of the bullseye, he said. Now, he retracted that statement, and President Trump has said some things about unity that President Biden has said, but we are in the midst of a heated campaign, and it's beyond dispute that President Trump has been the most attacked and maligned public figure in the history of the country.
But you yourself said that the discourse should not be personal or targeting people. Have you just changed your mind? Is this now the campaign you want?
No, look, I articulate things in a certain way, and Donald Trump does as well. But his grievances, as you said, are because he has been the subject of so many attacks. He was speaking there in that clip about the lawfare that he's had to endure. I mean, they have turned the justice system against him because he's a political opponent of the sitting president. I mean, these are objective facts. Some of these cases are being dismissed now, but they've dragged he and his family through hell, literally, for years now. They tried to impeach him. They've tried to attack him in every way. They now have turned the justice system against him. So, I mean, I think the American people understand his frustration, and I think he is echoing what many of them feel. Look at the size of the rallies. I mean, they have long waiting lines outside the perimeter of these events because people long to hear his message. They want change.
Mr. Speaker, first of all, I will dispute those aren't necessarily objective facts, but you are saying. But I want to turn to what is happening with President Biden. As of this morning, it does not look like he is going anywhere. But if he does step down, you said this week the Republicans are likely to bring legal challenges against any attempts to replace Biden on the Democratic ticket. How would that work?
Well, these elections are handled at the state level. Every state has its own system. And in some of these, it's not possible to simply just switch out a candidate who has been chosen through the Democratic, small d Democratic process over such a long period of time. 14 million Democrats voted to make Joe Biden the nominee. So it would be wrong and I think unlawful in accordance to some of these states' rules for a handful of people to go in a back room and switch it out because they don't like the candidate any longer. That's not how this is supposed to work. So I think they would run into some legal impediments in at least a few of these jurisdictions. And I think there'll be a compelling case to be made that shouldn't happen. And so I think they've got legal trouble if that's their if that's their intention and that's their plan. So we'll see how it plays out. We don't know. I know the Democrats are in total disarray, and I know the Republican Party is united like never before. So we're looking forward to November and this election cycle. It's going to be an interesting time for the American people.
One election law expert, Rick Hasen, said there's no credence to that notion that since Biden isn't the party nominee yet, but we'll see how that all plays out. Our most recent poll shows a huge majority, 61%, wanting Joe Biden to step down. But our polls have also shown that the race is still a dead heat nationally between registered voters, 46% to 46%. What do you make of that?
Well, look, I could cite to you a number of polls who say the opposite, that it looks like it's, Donald Trump may be headed for a landslide. Now, don't take my word for it. Take the word of some of the top leading Democrats and, elected Democrats around the country who are in panic mode. That's the headlines that we've been reading for weeks, and I think that's true. I can tell you many of my colleagues on Capitol Hill, Democrats who are friends and colleagues, have lots of hand-wringing over this right now. They don't know what to do, and they don't have a viable plan B. Many of them don't believe that Kamala Harris is a viable candidate at the top either, and they're running out of time. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. From our perspective, Martha, it doesn't matter who they put at the top of the ticket. If Kamala is the nominee, so be it. She is the co-author and the co-owner of the policies of the Biden administration, and she owns all these policy failures herself. So we look forward to a vigorous debate about those policies and about the two competing visions for America. And I think the American people will side with the Republican Party. That's what the demographic moves are showing. There's a record number of Hispanic and Latino voters, a record number of Black and African American voters coming into the Republican Party. The Jewish community is more energized than I've ever seen a segment of the population, because they feel like Joe Biden and the Democrats have abandoned Israel, and in so many ways they have. So you see all these factors playing out across the country. And I mean, I'm traveling nonstop around the nation. That's what we're seeing on the ground. So polls are polls, but I think everybody senses something's happening here.
Mr. Speaker, I think you answered part of my next question already, but how would the GOP approach this race differently if the nominee does end up being Vice President Kamala Harris?
Well, you know, the interesting thing about this dynamic, whether it's Biden or Harris, is that both of these persons have held office. We had a Trump administration, we had a Biden-Harris administration, and people can compare the two. That put the campaign rhetoric aside. How are you and your family doing after the first 2 years of the Trump administration, for example, and the first few years of the Biden administration? I mean, it's no contest, and everybody knows that, and I think that's why we're in such good position. I think this election should not be about personalities, but about policies. People understand, as Obama said many years ago, elections really do have consequences.
President Trump was attacking her personally, as you know, last night. He wasn't really talking about her policies. He was talking about her laugh. He was saying she was crazy.
We could run the tape of terrible things that Kamala Harris has said about Donald Trump, of course, and Biden as well, and everybody in the Democrat leadership. I mean, we're accustomed to it now. It's their standard practice. But what President Trump is trying to do out on that campaign trail is prosecute the case to put forward his ideas and his vision, as he did in that lengthy speech at the RNC. He has a lot to say because he has a lot of ideas.
Let me stop on one idea, sir. Mr. Speaker, Ukraine. He says he could end that war in one day. How could he do that?
Well, I have a lot of confidence in President Trump being able to end that conflict because he will project strength. We maintain peace through strength. We have not had that in the 3.5 years of the Biden administration. It's been exactly the opposite, and that is why our adversaries are acting so provocatively.
Okay, but peace through strength, that may be what you believe in, but how could he end that war in one day?
President Trump has the ability to pick up the phone call and make threats and demands of adversaries around the world that they pay attention to because they fear him in some ways. There's real value in that. I mean, think of it. He said it in his speech. Russia did not invade Ukraine during his administration. We did not have the conflict in Israel, the war in Israel, as we have, because Iran has been empowered under Biden. We did not have China acting so provocatively as they are right now around the world. We've got hot wars around the globe. Our adversaries are nervous. We had the NATO summit, 2 weeks ago in Washington, and I met with foreign leaders, heads of state from around the globe that are our adversaries, and they are deeply concerned about the instability that America is projecting on the world stage because of Joe Biden and his weak leadership.
Mr. Speaker, I want
longer. President Trump will do the opposite.
I want to get quickly to this as a quick question. We're learning more about the details, really startling details about the assassination attempt. There are reports that the Trump campaign asked for more protection, not at that particular rally, perhaps, but over the last couple of years. And the Secret Service said basically that was true. Do you think Kimberly Cheatle should resign immediately, or that President Biden should fire her?
Both. I called on her to resign over the weekend, and when it became apparent that she wouldn't, I think on Friday, then I called for President Biden to fire her. The buck should stop at his desk. We absolutely must ensure accountability so the American people can trust that this job will be done, that we will protect our presidents and former presidents. It's the #1 job of the Secret Service, not anything else. And I think Director Cheatle has shown the world and said that she has different priorities. She needs to go.
Okay, thank you so much for joining us this morning, Mr. Speaker. We appreciate it.